Welcome to Conspiracist.
Great to be here.
Today we're looking into some material you've brought together, exploring a pretty significant hypothesis that governments might have intentionally concealed evidence related to the QAnon political movement.
That's the core idea we're examining.
So we're planning to take a deep dive into this. We'll look at what QAnon actually is, its main beliefs, and critically examine the arguments suggesting a deliberate cover-up.
And importantly, we're sticking strictly to the information available in the sources provided, aiming for an objective evaluation.
Exactly. Objectivity is key here. So maybe the best place to start is just, what is QAnon based on these materials?
Okay. Well, according to the documents, it really started gaining traction around November 2017.
Right.
And it got compared pretty quickly to Pizzagate, another conspiracy theory, but described as being on a much larger scale. Sort of Pizzagate on steroids was a phrase used.
Okay. Bigger scale. And adaptable, it seems.
Very adaptable. The sources describe it as a big tent conspiracy theory. That means it's constantly evolving, pulling in new claims, new narratives all the time.
So, not static at all. And it built on Pizzagate. How so?
It seems to have absorbed the core Pizzagate beliefs about widespread child trafficking rings run by elites, often called a cabal.
Gotcha. The cabal idea.
Yes, and a really central part of it was the belief that former President Trump wasn't just aware of this, but was actively, fighting this criminal network in secret.
So Trump as the central protagonist against this hidden evil.
Precisely. And it didn't stop there. The beliefs expanded quite dramatically. The sources mentioned claims about adrenochrome harvesting.
Right. That's the idea that elites harvest a substance from children. A very disturbing and completely unfounded claim.
Exactly. Unfounded, but it became part of the lore. And another key feature is how it merged with so many other pre-existing conspiracy theories.
Like what kind of theories?
Well, the materials mention a whole range. The Kennedy assassination, UFOs, 9/11 truth theories. It sort of pulled them all under its umbrella.
Wow, that's quite a combination. It creates a very wide net, doesn't it?
It really does. And some beliefs mentioned in the sources get even more specific and, frankly, quite strange. Like the idea that John F. Kennedy Jr. faked his death in that plane crash.
Right, I saw that mentioned. And that he is secretly Q.
Either that he is Q or, in another variation, that a prominent Trump supporter is actually JFK Jr. in disguise.
That really speaks to the imaginative leaps involved, I suppose.
It certainly shows how far the narratives could stretch. Now, looking at the timeline provided, things seem to shift after the 2020 election.
How so?
Well, the frequency of the Q drops, the online posts, supposedly from Q, decreased dramatically. The last authenticated post mentioned in the sources is December 2020.
Interesting timing. And what about the real-world impacts around then?
The sources clearly link QAnon beliefs to efforts to overturn the election results, and also to the events of January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. QAnon symbols and slogans were reportedly quite visible there.
Right. And then there was the reaction from tech companies.
A major reaction. The materials detail widespread crackdowns by social media platforms. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, they all implemented policies to ban or restrict QAnon content.
Took down groups, pages, accounts.
Thousands, yes. Although the sources also note that enforcing these bans wasn't always straightforward, especially initially, with how the language and symbols evolved.
So a significant pushback in the online space. The materials also mention a connection to international events, specifically Ukraine.
Yes, that's a notable point. Some QAnon promoters apparently started echoing Russian disinformation narratives.
About what specifically?
About U.S.-funded biological laboratories in Ukraine. These were false claims, widely debunked, suggesting they were developing bioweapons.
And how did that connect to QAnon followers?
Some followers reportedly picked up this narrative and used it to justify the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Suggesting the invasion was necessary to destroy these supposed labs.
That was the justification presented by some, yes. It shows how external disinformation can be folded into the existing belief system.
It's clear QAnon has faced a lot of criticism. The FBI labeling it a potential domestic terror threat stands out.
It does. And interestingly, the skepticism wasn't just external.
What do you mean?
Well, the sources mention figures like Steve Bannon and a leaked conversation involving Michael Flynn, where they apparently suggested QAnon might actually be a psychological operation, a psyop, or maybe just disinformation.
So even some potentially sympathetic figures were questioning its origins or purpose.
Exactly. It highlights the ambiguity surrounding the whole phenomenon.
And the sources also mention concerns after Biden's inauguration.
Yes, concerns that disillusioned followers, perhaps feeling abandoned after Q went silent and Trump left office, might be vulnerable to recruitment by other extremist groups.
A potential pathway to further radicalization.
That was the concern raised. And we also saw, back in 2020, several candidates running for office who openly identified with or expressed support for QAnon.
Showing its move into the mainstream political arena to some extent.
Definitely. And then there were former President Trump's own comments.
Right. The sources describe them as somewhat ambiguous.
He acknowledged the support he received from QAnon followers. And when asked directly about the core premise, the idea of him saving the world from this cabal, his response, as quoted, questioned if it was a bad thing or a good thing.
Which leaves a lot open to interpretation.
It certainly does.
Okay, so that brings us back to the central hypothesis we're trying to evaluate based on these materials. The idea of government concealment.
Right. Intentional hiding of evidence.
Given the really extreme nature of QAnon's core claims, child trafficking, satanic rituals, elites involved, if evidence did exist, the implications would be earth-shattering, wouldn't they?
Absolutely immense.
Yeah.
So thinking about that potential impact, what reasons might be suggested for why a government would conceal such evidence, if it existed?
Well, one argument often seen in these kinds of theories, and likely reflected in the sources, is the idea of preventing mass panic.
Maintaining social order.
Exactly. Or protecting national security, however defined. If the QAnon claims were true, revealing them could destabilize society entirely. That's the line of reasoning.
So the alleged concealment would be framed as a kind of necessary evil to prevent chaos.
Potentially, yes. Or another motivation attributed in these scenarios is often protecting powerful individuals.
Shielding them from accountability.
Right. If elites were truly involved in the horrific acts alleged by QAnon, a cover-up would obviously serve their interests. Or perhaps it's about maintaining a specific, carefully constructed public narrative about how the world works.
Protecting the status quo, in effect.
That's the idea. And proponents of the concealment theory often point to the lack of publicly available definitive proof for QAnon's claims.
How does that work? How is absence of evidence used as evidence?
The argument flips it. They'd say, these claims are so huge, some evidence must exist. Therefore, the fact that we don't see irrefutable proof means it must be being actively suppressed.
I see. The absence itself becomes suspicious in that framework.
Correct. And then you have the actions by the social media companies we discussed earlier.
The bans and restrictions. How does that fit into the concealment hypothesis?
Well, someone who believes in the cover-up might not see those as independent corporate decisions about platform safety or misinformation.
They'd see it as, what? Part of the conspiracy?
Potentially, yes. As part of a broader, maybe even government-influenced or directed effort to silence the truth, to suppress the information QAnon was supposedly revealing.
Regardless of whether the claims were actually true or not, the act of suppression is seen as confirming their importance.
That's often the interpretation, yes. But of course, we have to look at the other side. What are the alternative explanations for the lack of verifiable evidence?
And the most direct one, based on the available information, is simply that the core claims of QAnon might not be based on verifiable facts.
That the theory itself is unfounded.
Precisely. And the materials likely delve into other factors contributing to belief, beyond just the idea of a cover-up.
Like psychological factors.
Absolutely. Psychology plays a huge role in belief, especially in conspiracy theories. Things like the need for control, for understanding complex events, for finding simple explanations for confusing things.
And social identity, right? Belonging to a group that feels it has secret knowledge.
Yes, that's a powerful motivator. QAnon seems to fulfill various needs. Existential needs like finding meaning, epistemic needs like feeling you understand the world, and social needs like community.
And there's our general human tendency to see patterns, isn't there?
Epiphania, yes. Seeing meaningful connections in random data. That can definitely fuel belief in complex conspiracies where followers are encouraged to connect the dots themselves.
The cryptic nature of the Q drops probably encouraged that kind of pattern seeking.
Very likely. And we can't ignore the role of the platforms themselves.
Social media algorithms.
Exactly. Creating echo chambers where people are primarily exposed to information confirming their existing beliefs. This can amplify conspiracy theories and make them seem much more widespread or plausible than they are.
Reinforcement loops.
Also, the way QAnon, as we discussed, pulled in elements from other conspiracy theories, likely widened its appeal.
Tapping into existing anxieties or beliefs.
Right. It wasn't entirely new. It built on familiar tropes, making it easier for some people to accept.
The sources might also mention the almost game-like aspects.
Yes, the playful or participatory features, decoding the drops, sharing interpretations, feeling like part of an investigation. That engagement can be very compelling.
Like an alternate reality game, but with real-world beliefs and consequences.
In some ways, yes. And for some individuals, perhaps feeling disenfranchised or powerless, believing in QAnon might have acted as a coping mechanism.
Offering an explanation for their situation and a sense of hope, maybe?
A framework, yeah. A sense that powerful forces are at work, but also that there's a secret plan to fix things. The materials might also touch on its spread into alternative spiritual or wellness communities.
Really? How does that connection work?
It seems some QAnon themes got merged with New Age ideas or wellness culture, sometimes involving anti-vaccine sentiments or distrust of mainstream medicine, broadening its reach into unexpected demographics.
So a whole constellation of factors could explain the belief and its spread without needing a government cover-up.
That's the crucial point for an objective evaluation. The lack of evidence could simply mean the theory is unfounded, rather than evidence being actively hidden.
Okay. What about the identity of Q itself? That remains a big question mark, doesn't it?
A huge one. The anonymity is central. The sources likely mention investigations trying to figure out who is behind the posts.
Like that documentary filmmaker Colin Hoback.
Yes, his work suggested a potential link to Ron Watkins, the administrator of the image board site 8chan, later Aiken, where Q posted.
Did Watkins ever confirm or deny it?
Well, the materials might reference an on-camera moment where he seemed to slip up, but generally he's denied being Q, though he did acknowledge having years of anonymous intelligence training, which added to the speculation.
And is it likely just one person?
Analysis mentioned in the sources often suggest that the writing style and consistency changed over time, leading to theories that multiple authors might have been involved in crafting the Q posts.
So the mystery around Q's identity persists.
It absolutely does.
Finally, we need to touch upon the consequences. These beliefs weren't just abstract ideas, they had real-world impacts, according to the sources.
Very real and often harmful impacts. The materials may highlight specific examples, like the harassment directed at families of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting victims.
Based on the false belief, it was a staged event, a common theme in related conspiracy circles.
Exactly. And, as we mentioned, the direct links drawn between QAnon beliefs, the promotion of election fraud narratives, and the actions seen during the January 6th Capitol attack.
A clear example of online beliefs translating into physical action.
Undeniably. And beyond specific events, there's the broader consequence of undermining trust.
Trust in what?
In democratic institutions, in the media, in science, in expertise generally. That erosion of trust is a significant societal impact.
And the FBI warning about potential violence wasn't theoretical.
No, it was based on observing how these ideologies could motivate individuals towards violence. There's also the personal toll.
On families and relationships.
Yes, the sources might allude to the immense strain QAnon beliefs have placed on families, causing rifts between believers and non-believers, isolating people from their support networks.
That's a deeply damaging consequence at a very personal level.
It really is.
So to wrap this up, we've explored this hypothesis of government concealment surrounding QAnon, looking at the movement's core ideas and the arguments presented in the materials for and against that hypothesis.
And what seems clear from the information provided is that QAnon is this really complex phenomenon. It's driven by a mix of belief systems, psychological needs, online social dynamics, and political currents.
Right. And based purely on the materials we've reviewed, the idea of an intentional government cover-up remains just that, a hypothesis, an assertion made within the QAnon narrative itself.
Without verifiable, independent evidence presented in these sources to support it, and with many alternative explanations for the belief spread and the lack of proof for its claims.
So a critical evaluation of all the available information, considering those alternative factors, seems essential when looking at this.
Definitely. Understanding the why behind belief often involves looking at those complex psychological and social factors, not just jumping to conclusions about hidden actions.
It really highlights the power of narrative in the digital age and how difficult it can be to untangle belief from verifiable facts sometimes.
A challenge indeed.
Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.